Usually, whenever you encounter a character that looks like they've been literally stitched together like so many pieces of cloth, you tend to empathize with them to a certain degree, because usually they have backstories that are more horrifying than Thanksgiving with your not-so-great relatives. Take Juzo from Tokyo Ghoul. We all love the maniacal CCG Ghoul Hunter not just because of his antiques, but also because we know the abuse he suffered through growing up as Big Madam's attack and lapdog. You'll find yourself grasping for a redeeming quality when it comes to the subject of our video, however, because despite his human look, Mahito would love nothing more than genocide of the human species, and believe it or not, it all comes down to his anatomy. Being a cursed spirit, he wants to see his kind on top, and if he would just been a little less absorbed, he could have accomplished that goal by himself. That's because Mahito is a special grade cursed spirit with seemingly limitless potential for growth, and as we've already stated, it all comes down to his anatomy. So without further ado, this is Mahito's anatomy explored. How was Mahito born? Why does he look like a human being? Cursed spirits in Jujutsu Kaisen aren't usually born due to a specific reason. Generally speaking, a cursed spirit is created when the cursed energy leaking from human beings gathers into one spot and keeps gathering like sediment until the said energy takes the form of a cursed spirit. This is why most of the fight scenes in JJK occur around public places like schools, hospitals, bridges, and yes, subway stations. Public spaces tend to see massive influxes of negative emotions, which form the basis of all cursed energy, which is why they basically function as breeding grounds for cursed spirits, though cursed spirits can be born anywhere with a high enough concentration of cursed energy. Now, the interesting thing about cursed spirits is that although they aren't explicitly compared with the devils of Chainsaw Man, they do function like them in certain ways. Lower grade curses like flyheads and that one curse Geto exercises in his introduction scene in JJK 0 seem to be associated with specific negative emotions and thoughts. For example, the flyhead Nanami exercises at his favorite bakery was making the proprietor feel tense and overworked, a feeling that vanished as soon as Nanami exercised it. Because the flyhead is below even grade 4 in the ranking system devised by Jujutsu sorcerers, exercising it doesn't need a lot of effort, but you can see why that would be the case. The flyhead seems to be an expression of work-related stress and tension. Similarly, that cursed spirit Geto eats in his JJK 0 introduction scene seems to be associated with thoughts of sexual violence against women and causes them to feel as though they are being choked by an unseen entity. We can say this definitely because Geto describes the effects of the cursed spirit cursing that girl was experiencing down to its minute details. It appears as though the more specific the feeling associated with a cursed spirit is, the stronger and more bizarrely human-like they start appearing. Each of the disaster curses are associated with a certain element of nature, but they're all born from very specific primal and enduring fears of mankind. Japanese people in general. Hanami was born because of humanity's fear of forests and their inhumane treatment of the same. Jogo is born because of the fear of volcanoes, which is understandable considering the story takes place in Japan. Dagon is most likely a compressed representation of the tsunami that hit Japan in 2011. Keeping in line with this logic laid out in the series, Mahito is a cursed spirit that represents the fear humans have in their hearts for other human beings. He was born a short while before the series began, as it is stated he is far younger than Jogo in the Disaster Curses group, and unlike the rest of his compatriots, Mahito doesn't look like a cursed spirit at all. In fact, if you're not aware of the world of Jujutsu, you might have thought he was some sort of torture survivor. That's how much of a human being he looks like. The reason for this probably has a lot to do with the specific circumstances of his birth and creation. While we know nothing about either of those, in that we don't know where or when exactly he was born, we can at least safely say that he was born from humanity's propensity to commit evil against itself. The rest of the disaster curses possess human-like traits. They are bipedal, can talk, and have feelings and emotions that resemble those of a human's quite closely. But only Jogo even comes close to looking human, and he lacks a nose and has an active volcano for hair. Mahito is the only cursed spirit we've seen in the series that looks completely human, period. This at least tells us that whatever negativity birthed him was concentrated specifically on human beings' treatment of other human beings. His stitched-together patchwork-like appearance becomes a damning testament to human nature when you think about it from that perspective. Considering we live in a world where a war and an armed conflict are going on as we speak, it isn't hard to imagine why Mahito exists. But what exactly is his place on the pecking order of cursed spirit power rankings? Well, let's get into that now. What is Mahito's innate technique? How does it make him a special grade? Like the rest of his Cursed Spirit group, Mahito is also a special grade Cursed Spirit, albeit an unregistered one. Now you might be asking what makes any sorcerer, cursed tool, or spirit a special grade in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. After all, we have pretty vivid descriptions of the first 4 grades, but so far, the anime hasn't addressed what the criterion is for a person, tool, or cursed spirit to be considered special grade. And that's where we come in. Mild spoiler alert, in the manga, it is revealed that any entity that manipulates cursed energy in the JJK verse is only classified as a special grade when it can take down an entire nation by itself. Now you guys can understand why Gojo Satoru is the definition of a special grade in the series, because he can literally take over Japan if he wanted to tomorrow on a whim, and no one would be able to do anything about it. Jogo, Hanami, and Dagon are in that same ballpark, but it's obvious that there are levels even to this special grade stuff. Jogo is said to be as strong as 8 to 9 of Sukuna's fingers, and yet he gets treated like a spoiled brat by Gojo in their first encounter. He then goes on to nearly decimate Shibuya Station's exterior in his fight against Sukuna, summoning a damn meteor with his maximum technique. Dagon can create an entire island with a beach, the ocean, multiple sea monsters, etc., using his domain expansion, and yet he was defeated by the sorcerer killer Toji Fushiguro in a reanimated body. Clearly, power scaling isn't precise in the JJK verse, but even under these dubious circumstances, Mahito stands head and shoulders above his peers and adversaries because of his innate technique. While cursed spirits usually cannot use cursed techniques, those spirits which approach special grade status can, and special grades can basically fight like Jujutsu sorcerers, making them the most dangerous threat to society. Mahito is doubly dangerous in that regard because his cursed technique is called Idol Transfiguration, and what it does is it alters the shape of its target soul. The concept of the body and the soul heavily influence the story of Jujutsu Kaisen. While the physical body itself is capable to taking damage and dealing it, the body is not the end of a person's complete physiology. Their souls coexist alongside their bodies, and the two entities have a sort of symbiotic relationship with one another. What Mahito's Idol Transfiguration technique allows him to do is to alter the shape of the soul of any living entity he touches with his hands. If the shape of the soul is altered, the shape of a person's body will be altered as well, and once that happens, Mahito can use his newly created transfigured humans pretty much any way he wishes to use them. He can turn human beings into grotesque creatures resembling cursed spirits in an instant, and then use these creatures for attacking his opponents, defending himself, causing distractions, playing psychological games with people. You think of a use of them, and Mahito has probably already thought of it. Because his ability allows him to alter souls however he sees fit, he can shrink his transfigured humans to such an extent that they can all fit in a bag. If Mahito manages to touch you in the middle of a battle and activate his cursed technique, that's the last moment you will have as a human being, which is why he was immediately classified as a special grade by Nanami in their first encounter. Physical attacks you can block, but blocking an attack on your soul, that's impossible if you do not possess Mahito's cursed technique, which makes him one of the most unique characters in all of JJK. There is a workaround to this, but it's so convoluted that honestly you'd rather just die. But we will get into that in a short while. Given enough preparation time and access to, resources, Mahito could easily erect a whole army of transfigured humans without even exhausting his cursed energy reserves. He sends in 2 trains packed with his monster creations to Shibuya in Season 2, and that's not even mentioning the ones that wreak havoc overground. Considering each subway car can hold anywhere between 100 to 150 people, even if we were to adjust for the body types of transfigured humans, that easily puts the number of troops in Mahito's control to somewhere between dozens and hundreds of people. With enough manpower, taking out a nation would be a child's work for him, and he wouldn't even have to get involved. That is not to say he can't throw down himself, because can Mahito alter his own soul? How does he use this to his advantage in battles? Idol Transfiguration is not a technique that is restricted to external usage only, and this is where its versatility truly shines. Mahito can not only alter the shape of the soul of other sentient beings he touches, he can also alter the shape of his own soul. This gives him one of the most dynamic fighting styles in all of JJK, which he doesn't hesitate to exploit mid-battle or otherwise. Mahito is a physical specimen even without his cursed technique. He has shown to be able to tank having entire pillars being thrown directly at his head without taking a scratch's worth of damage. Heck, he even managed to survive getting blitzed by Yuji and Nanami at Junpei's school when he revealed himself to the sorcerers for the first time. But what truly puts him in a league of his own is his downright instinctive usage of his idol transfiguration technique, not on his enemies but on himself. When Mahito uses his technique on someone else, he needs to touch them for it to work. The body is the gateway to the soul, so when he comes into contact with someone, he instantly gets access to their souls. The transformation process is near instant from that point out, but when it comes to his own body, he can instantly manipulate his own form, making him one of the most difficult to pin down enemies in all of JJK. During the aforementioned face-off with Yuji and Nanami, Mahito went through a whole host of forms where he shrank, expanded, became snake-like, and even pierced through Yuji's hands by making spikes come out of his own. His control over his transformation forms and timing has improved vastly in Season 2, as evidenced by his solo fight against Ultimate Mekamaru and all his robot dummies. When Mahito uses idol transfiguration, he doesn't just change his body's shape, he can change its physiology down to its mass, structure, and pretty much anything else he wants to control. During his battle with Ultimate Mekamaru, Mahito turned into a fish, then a bird to escape Kokichi Muta's ultra-giant mecha monster. He changed his right arm into a comically large Hulk head, and Hulk smashed a dozen Mekamaru puppets with a single swing of his hand. Whenever Mahito needs to make an escape, he can simply shrink or turn into a slimy form that none can capture and make his exit via the nearest available escape route. Considering he's fast enough to surprise Blitz Nanami in a one-on-one scenario, we doubt anyone in the current world without Toji's speed or Gojo's technique could stop him from escaping. Combine this with his transfigured humans and you get an enemy that has the tools and the mental capacity to destroy an entire unit of sorcerers without needing much prep time. And as if all of this already wasn't enough, it turns out Mahito has figured out how to split his soul in such a way that he can create a near-perfect clone of himself. We saw this fairly recently on our screens when Mahito surprised Yuji by having not one but two of himself standing by to fight strong sorcerers. After spending several months fighting strong opponents, Mahito's control over his technique has increased to the point where he can now split his soul perfectly in two and retain almost the same amount of energy that he usually has as one. But there is a drawback to this, as Best Girl Kugisaki showed us in the last episode of JJK. Because Mahito's clone is essentially a part of its original soul, any damage its soul takes will be sent back to the original as well, making sorcerers that can attack souls particularly dangerous to Mahito, and that's just the segue we needed to get into the next segment, which is: how does Mahito's domain expansion work? Is there a way to counter it? Mahito's innate technique focused on soul manipulation, so it only makes sense that his domain expansion would do the same. Mahito's domain expansion is called Self-Embodiment of Perfection, and it perhaps is the most frightening domain expansion in all of JJK. To activate the domain, Mahito needed 2 hand gestures initially, but by the time Shibuya rolls around, he only needs 1. When he activates his domain, several shadowy black hands emerge from around his body, which try to capture his target and literally pull them into the domain expansion. Once inside, the landscape resembles an abstract void with one key difference: it is populated by an infinite number of Mahito hands. A domain expansion is a sure hit technique, which means that once someone gets caught inside of it, and they will be hit with the user's technique unless they override the domain with their own. And given that Mahito's innate technique is to literally alter souls, you guys understand the ramifications for anyone caught within it. In fact, when Mahito debuted his domain, it managed to capture Nanami, who was ready to die because he knew he couldn't break the domain by himself, but this also exposes 2 critical chinks in Mahito's soul-wrapped armor. A domain expansion is a technique that concentrates the user's cursed energy to create the conditions and environment needed for their victory. Within the domain's premises, this means that from the outside, Mahito's domain remains vulnerable, and usually the stronger your domain's internal activity is, the weaker its external surface will be, making it very susceptible to a breach from the outside. That's exactly what happens the first time Mahito opens his domain, because Yuji, who manages to dodge it, just breaks a whole sphere from the outside, thus rescuing Nanami from a terrible fate, at least at the time. But if that isn't enough to get the job done, like it wasn't even in that instance, then you have 2 options. The first is to enter the domain with another soul housed in your own body, which is stronger than Mahito. This is a scenario unique to Yuji, which is how he was able to make Mahito retreat in that first sight. Sukuna does not take kindly to this respect, and Mimiko and Nanako Mahito know that very personally. Also, Yuji is uniquely positioned to be Mahito's foil because as the vessel of Sukuna, he has more than one soul in his body. This in turn allows him to land hits directly on Mahito's soul, which makes them the perfect adversaries for each other. Kugisaki's resonance technique is a rare example of a cursed technique working not just on the body but the soul as well. As Mahito immediately targets her after realizing what her technique could mean for his life, the other option is to use a technique that neutralizes Mahito's cursed technique, like Kokichi Muta does with a simple domain. A simple domain is a relatively simple barrier technique that is used in the series as a way to neutralize any cursed technique, domain or otherwise, that enters its radius. Mekamaru was able to land a serious blow on Mahito's soul using a simple domain-loaded missile and shocked the world when he managed to use the same technique again to resist the effects of self-embodiment of perfection. But even if you manage to slash him to near death, blast out a piece of his soul, break his domain or trap him within your own, you will still not be able to kill him for good. This is because of the reasons we will mention down below. Why is Mahito the strongest cursed spirit in the series? Despite being the youngest disaster cursed spirit, and no Dagon the cursed womb doesn't count for this one, Mahito is perhaps the strongest of them all, or at least the one with the most growth potential, which he has been bringing to life ever since the Shibuya arc hit our screens. Even before he learned how to use a domain expansion, his natural strength and cursed energy output was considered to be greater than Three-Finger Yuji, who was recommended for a promotion to Grade A at the end of Season 1. By the time Shibuya came around, Mahito's powers increased to the point that he can now toy with 15-Finger Yuji like he was no Finger Yuji. This mostly comes down to Mahito's technique and the way that cursed spirits work in general. For instance, apart from Mahito, Jogo was perhaps the strongest member of the disaster curses. He was certainly one of the oldest, as he had battle experiences to boast of that Mahito and Hanami simply did not, and yet Jogo named Mahito the leader of the group because he recognized within him the potential for a world where cursed spirits could actually displace human beings. Mahito might be a very young cursed spirit, but he is a highly intelligent one at that, and derives a sadistic sense of pleasure from a fight that his other peers did not display. He often ruminates on the nature of the body and the soul and which came first, meaning which truly defines the existence of the other. Mahito thinks the soul came first, and he also thinks that because he and his fellow cursed spirits are essentially amalgamations of the worst side of humanity, that they are allowed to treat humans like playthings. Mahito, usually turning people into transfigured humans, hinted to us that his playful smile in post-episode football matches with Geto and the boys are nothing more than PR to hide his real face, and that face is one that contains utter apathy for human beings. Just how sorcerers exercise cursed spirits without caring, Mahito transfigures human beings without caring in a twisted representation of equal treatment. In fact, he calls his transfigured human experiments and actively seeks how to sow the seeds of hatred between humans whenever he can. He wants Nanami not as a challenge but as a plaything, which is disconcerting to say the least. The greatest example of this kind of cerebral deadliness would be, of course, Junpei, whom he pretended to befriend only to kill without regret, shame, or hesitation. Mahito's understanding of his own cursed technique has deepened to the point where he can create attacks equivalent to being shot from all sides with lasers. Using idol transfiguration, Mahito can not only alter the souls of people, he can also merge two or more of them into a single entity. Because souls are individualistic by nature in the JJK verse, forcing two or more of them to combine creates a chain reaction which ends up being far stronger than any other attack he can create with his own body. Called Body Repel, Mahito uses this ability to cut clear through concrete and human beings alike and can activate it from multiple locations in his vicinity at once. All he needs is a transfigured human totem with multiple souls in it. During his final fight with Yuji and Todo, Mahito tries to overcome Todo's Boogie Woogie using these multi-directional body repellers and manages to keep up far better than Hanami did, showcasing his own natural reflexes. When dodging and trying to anticipate Todo's next move doesn't let Mahito kill his targets, he creates these giant transfigured monsters called polymorphic isomers to defend himself, and let us tell you, these guys pack more than a punch. Now, usually when Mahito transfigures someone, a countdown begins. As the technique physically alters the human body and mind, most of the time a transfigured human only survives for a few minutes, at best a few hours, before their biology becomes unstable and they die. But these soul isomers are are created out of a bunch of weak souls, which keeps it highly stable and also makes it super strong because of the sheer number of souls in it. These soul isomers can take out Todo with a single punch, and while they are not very sustainable, so to speak, the advantage they give you in an ambush type situation is just unfathomable. And this is not even to say anything of Mahito's own fighting prowess. Everything we've discussed in this video so far has stemmed from Mahito's anatomy as a special grade cursed spirit. But what would you guys say if we told you this isn't the real Mahito at all? What does Mahito's true form look like? Could he have defeated Gojo Satoru? Spoiler alert for everything here on out. But no, the patch-based form of Mahito is not his true form, in the sense that it is a reflection of what he thinks his soul looks like. It is only after landing a few black flashes on Yuji that Mahito finally sees what his soul actually looks like, and once having gained a kind of omniscient understanding of cursed energy that the heightened black flash state gives you, it's only a matter of putting two and two together. During his battle with Yuji and Todo, Mahito not only berates his opponents, Yuji in particular, but he also transforms mid-battle. This isn't new to Mahito. We saw him literally learn how to perform a domain expansion in the middle of getting jumped by Yuji and Nanami. When he saw Gojo unleash his 0.2-second domain, Mahito got inspired and created his own version of the same to counter Yuji and Todo's onslaught. Mahito knew that spending too much time in a domain with Sukuna would probably get him killed, and without enough time he would not be able to break Yuji and Todo's teamwork. So he activates a 0.2-second domain and succeeds in touching Todo's arm, due to which he starts transfiguring. Mahito is a battle genius, but without his insanely adept and adaptable anatomy, he would never be able to pull off such a feat. And just when you think he is down and out, he pulls another ace out of his own butt by revealing that what we've been seeing so far isn't even his true form. In his true form, Mahito looks like Hanami Ate Mahito, and then made a baby with Maharaga for some reason. After realizing the truest essence of his own soul, having experienced the omniscient rush of Black Flash multiple times, Mahito self-transfigures into this alien-like being whose powers are just off the charts. For starters, Mahito's true form is 200% stronger than his base form. You've heard us correct, he is 200% stronger post-transfiguration. He moves an arm, he creates shockwaves that break the ground. He blitzes Yuji at speeds that his eye cannot keep up with, and the single blow from Mahito is so strong that he makes Itadori cough up blood with a hit that Yuji did everything he could to defend against. On his elbows and his head, Mahito sprouts blade-like appendages that he can move at will, and the only thing that keeps him from becoming a literal demon god here is the fact that he somehow still retains all the damage done to him by Yuji and Todo. In his true form, Mahito is far stronger than any Jujutsu sorcerer can hope to be, but while it boosts all his other stats, the transfiguration doesn't heal his injuries. Moreover, Mahito, drunk on his newfound power, ends up committing a crucial error by trying to taunt Yuji into making a mistake. Up until that point, he was absolutely crushing the best brother duo all by himself. In fact, had Mahito figured out his soul's truest essence before his first meeting with Sukuna, there is no telling how their encounter would unfold, given the significant power boost Mahito's true form gives him. As for whether he could have defeated Gojo, well, that question will probably remain ambiguous forever. Now that Gojo is in the prison realm and Mahito is getting closer and closer to his goal of cursed spirit domination, it's tough to gauge who can possibly defeat the latter without his limiters. Yuta Okotsu immediately comes to mind, and so does Yuki, but both of them have cursed spirits on them that Mahito can exploit to his advantage, and if he can't, all he has to do is touch them and their lives are as good as forfeit. It is poetic irony that Mahito's story ends the way the life of his first acolyte does, but don't take our word for it. Just be sure to tune in for the next episode of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 as soon as it drops. Marvel's verdict. Speaking of drops, we're afraid this is where we drop off, because this is all we've had prepared for this video. Mahito is definitely one of the most intriguing, if not sickening, characters in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. He has a childlike immaturity and borderline innocence to him that reminds both of us and Nanami of Gojo Satoru. But make no mistake, that comparison is not just one of demeanor, it's also one of strength. If left unchecked, even Nanami, the guy who thinks life is nothing more than a summary of all the small defeats you face each day, isn't sure all of Jujutsu High could do something about Mahito, and that includes Gojo. Soul manipulation is a power that is extremely tricky to pull off. Just ask some of the people that played God of War Ragnarok, but by tying it with Mahito's anatomy, Gege Akutami managed to give us an iconic villain that will endure the ages. But enough about what we think. How about you guys? What do you guys think about Mahito and his accursed anatomy? Let us know in the comments down below. If you want more Jujutsu Kaisen content, don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe bell, and turn the notification notification setting to always. Marvelous Anime aims to bring you the best of anime content, and we can't wait to give you guys more Jujutsu Kaisen content. Let us know if you want more JJK content from us down below, and we'll see you guys in the next video.